Most people will never become leaders, not because they lack intelligence, not because they don't have potential, but because they can't control themselves. And the worst part? Most of them don't even realize it. You felt it before, that moment when something small triggers you, when your emotions rise faster than your thoughts, when you react and then regret it seconds later. Not because you didn't know better, but because in that moment you weren't in control. And every time you do that, you teach yourself that you can't be trusted. You think leadership is about controlling people, about having authority, making decisions, telling others what to do. It's not. Real leadership begins in a place most people avoid, not in a meeting room, not on a stage, not in front of others. It begins in the quiet moments, when no one is watching you, when something inside you gets triggered, when your instincts tell you to react. That's where leadership is decided. I remember a moment that changed how I understood this completely. A close colleague of mine had just been promoted. Smart, capable, respected for years. Everyone thought he would be a great leader, and for a while it looked like he was. Until one meeting. The pressure was high, deadlines were tight. Someone challenged his decision in front of the team. It wasn't even aggressive, just a simple question. But something shifted inside him. His tone changed, his posture tightened. His response came too fast. He didn't yell, he didn't explode, but everyone in the room felt it. And in that moment, something broke. Not the project, not the strategy. Trust. No one said it out loud. But from that day on, people stopped seeing him the same way. They listened, but they didn't follow. They responded, but they didn't believe. And slowly, quietly, his influence started to fade. He didn't lose his position that day. He lost control of himself. And that changed everything. Here's what most people don't want to admit. It's not the world holding them back. It's the moment they lose control, over and over again. Research in behavioral psychology and neuroscience shows something powerful. The ability to regulate your emotions, to pause before reacting, to choose your response instead of surrendering to it. This is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success. Not just in leadership, but in life. Because people don't follow your words, they follow your stability. They watch how you handle pressure. They feel how you carry yourself when things go wrong. They notice whether you stay grounded or get pulled into chaos like everyone else. And here's the part nobody tells you. You don't become a leader when people start listening to you. You become a leader when you can finally trust yourself. When you say something and you mean it. When you make a decision and you stand by it. When you feel something and you don't let it control you. That's where real power begins. In the next hour, you're going to learn how to take that control back. Not in theory, not in vague advice, but in a way you can actually apply in your daily life, in conversations, in pressure, in the small moments that quietly shape who you are becoming. Because once you learn to control yourself, everything else starts to change. And if someone you care about is stuck right now, not because they're weak, but because they can't control themselves yet, send this to them. It might be the moment everything changes. Chapter 1. The moment you lose control. Most people imagine losing control as something dramatic, a voice raised too loud, a decision that ruins everything. A moment so obvious you can point to it and say, that's where it went wrong. But that's not how it really happens. You don't lose control in one moment. You lose it quietly. In moments no one else sees. It starts in places that feel harmless. You wake up with intention. Today will be different. You'll stay focused. You'll follow through. You'll finally do what you said you would do. And then something small pulls at you. A notification, a thought, a flicker of discomfort you don't want to sit with. You tell yourself, just a minute. And somehow that minute becomes 45. Nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. No one calls you out, but something important just slipped. Not your time, your control. I had a friend who was one of the sharpest people I knew. Quick thinker, calm under pressure, at least on the surface. The kind of person everyone expected to move up fast. But he had a pattern. Every time something felt difficult, just slightly uncomfortable, he would reach for his phone. Not dramatically, not even consciously, just automatically. A hard email? Check the phone. A complex task? Check the phone. A moment of uncertainty? Check the phone. At first it looked like nothing. Just a quick break, a mental reset. But patterns don't stay small. One afternoon we decided to work side by side. No pressure, no deadlines, just a quiet space to get things done. Within 10 minutes, he picked up his phone. I didn't say anything. A few minutes later, again, then again. It wasn't distraction anymore, it was reflex. After a while, I asked him, "Do you even notice you're doing that?" He looked down at his hand, almost confused, like he had just woken up mid-action. And he said, "I don't even feel it anymore." That's when it becomes dangerous. Not when you lose control, but when you stop noticing that you've lost it. Because at that point, it's no longer a choice. It's a pattern. And patterns, repeated long enough, don't just shape your behavior. They shape your identity. At some point, it's not something you do. It's who you become. A few months later, he didn't get the promotion he had been working toward. Not because he wasn't capable, but because the people around him had started to notice something he didn't. He couldn't stay present when things got hard. And if you can't stay present, you can't be trusted with pressure. That's the part most people never connect. They think their results are disconnected from their small habits. They think discipline is about big actions, pushing harder, doing more, trying again tomorrow. But discipline is not built in big moments. It's built in the ones you think don't matter. There's something happening in your mind every time you reach for distraction, every time you avoid discomfort, every time you react instead of choosing. Your brain is learning. Discomfort shows up and you leave. Uncertainty appears and you escape. Pressure builds and you look for relief. And each time you do that, your brain reinforces a simple rule. This is how we survive. Not by staying, but by avoiding. And the more you repeat that pattern, the less control you actually have when it matters. Because when real pressure shows up, real stakes, real consequences, you don't suddenly become stronger. You default to what you've practiced. That's the truth most people try to ignore. You don't rise to the level of your intentions, you fall to the level of your habits. And habits are built in moments so small they feel invisible. But they're not invisible, they're just unnoticed. There's a difference between people who drift through life and people who lead it. It's not talent, it's not confidence. It's not even discipline in the way most people think about it. It's awareness, the ability to notice the moment, before it takes you, before the reaction, before the distraction, before the escape. That space is small, almost too small to see, but it's there, and that's where control lives. Miss it, and you follow. Catch it, and you lead. Most people miss it every single day, not because they're weak, but because they've never trained themselves to see it. They wait until the outcome, until the damage is visible, until something is lost, time, opportunities, trust. But by then, the moment that mattered is already gone. Control is never lost at the outcome. It's lost at the beginning. At the first reaction, the first excuse, the first unconscious move. And here's the twist that changes everything. The real problem isn't that you lose control sometimes. The real problem is that you trust yourself, even when you're not in control. You say you'll focus, and you believe it. You say you'll stay disciplined, and you believe it. You say you'll change, and you believe it. But belief without awareness is fragile, because the moment pressure hits, your behavior tells the truth. Not your words, not your intentions, your patterns. And patterns don't lie. That's why leadership doesn't start with others. It starts here. Because if you can't trust your actions in small, invisible moments, you can't expect anyone else to trust you in the moments that matter. So before you try to lead a team, a project, or a vision, you have to answer something much harder. Can you lead yourself for one moment? Not all day. Not perfectly, just once. The next time discomfort shows up. The next time your mind looks for an exit. The next time something inside you says, avoid this. Can you stay? Can you notice it? Without immediately reacting? Because that moment, quiet, invisible, easy to ignore, is where control begins. And in the next chapter, you're going to see what's actually controlling you. And it's not what you think. Chapter 2. The emotion that controls you. You think you lose control because of distraction, because of your phone, because of your habits, because of your environment. But that's not the real reason. Those are just symptoms. The real reason you lose control is emotion. Not the big, obvious emotions, not anger you can see, not fear you can name, but the quiet ones, the ones that move fast, the ones you don't question, the ones that feel like truth. Most people don't even realize how often they're being controlled by what they feel. Because it doesn't look like losing control. It looks like reacting. It looks like speaking a little too fast, closing off just slightly, avoiding something without knowing why. It feels normal. That's what makes it dangerous. I remember sitting in a meeting once where everything seemed under control. A small team, a simple discussion, nothing intense. until one moment shifted the entire room. Someone questioned an idea, not aggressively, not even disrespectfully, just a calm, direct question, and you could see it happen. The person leading the meeting didn't explode, didn't raise their voice, but something inside them reacted. Their tone changed, just a little. Their words became sharper, just enough. Their posture tightened, almost invisible. If you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it. But everyone felt it. The energy in the room dropped. People stopped contributing. The conversation became cautious. Nothing dramatic happened. But leadership disappeared. That's how subtle it is. You don't have to lose control loudly. You just have to let emotion lead, even slightly. Because people don't respond to what you say. They respond to what you carry. And emotion leaks, always. Here's what most people never understand. Emotions are not the problem. They're automatic, fast, built into you. They exist to protect you. When something feels like a threat, whether it's real or imagined, your brain reacts before you can think. That's not weakness. That's wiring. But here's where it gets dangerous. Just because something feels true doesn't mean it is. That tight feeling in your chest, that urge to defend yourself, that instinct to pull away, to shut down, to avoid, it feels right, it feels justified, but most of the time it's just your mind trying to escape discomfort. And if you don't catch it, you follow it. There was a moment in my own life where I saw this clearly. I was working on something that mattered to me, something I had put real time into. And when I shared it, the response I got wasn't what I expected. It wasn't even harsh, just honest. But in that moment I felt it, that shift, a quiet resistance, a voice in my head saying, "They don't get it," a tightening that made me want to defend, to explain, to push back. And for a second I almost did. But something stopped me. Not strength, awareness. I noticed the feeling before I acted on it, and that changed everything. Because instead of reacting, I paused. And in that pause I saw something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't them, it was me. My need to be right. My discomfort with being challenged. My instinct to protect my ego. The emotion felt like truth, but it wasn't. It was protection. And if I had followed it, I would have defended something that needed to change. That's the moment most people miss. They think control means suppressing emotion, pushing it down, ignoring it, pretending it's not there. But that doesn't work. Suppressed emotion doesn't disappear. It leaks out in other ways, in tone, in tension, in the way you show up. Real control isn't about ignoring what you feel, it's about seeing it, without obeying it. That's the difference between reacting and choosing, between being driven and being in control. Because once you can see the emotion clearly, you're no longer inside it, and that distance, small but powerful, is where control begins. Most people never create that space. They feel and they act, instantly, automatically. And over time they build a pattern, emotion to reaction to regret, again and again, until it becomes who they are. But here's the twist that changes everything. The problem isn't that emotions are strong, it's that you've been trained to trust them. To treat every feeling as a signal to act. If it feels uncomfortable, leave. If it feels threatening, defend. If it feels uncertain, avoid. And the more you follow that pattern, the less control you have when it actually matters. Because in high-pressure moments, you don't suddenly become rational, you become predictable, driven by whatever emotion hits first. That's why two people can face the same situation and respond in completely different ways. One reacts, the other pauses. One defends, the other listens. One loses the room, the other leads it. The difference isn't intelligence, it's control over emotion. And control begins with one simple shift. You stop asking, "What do I feel?" and you start asking, "What is this feeling trying to make me do?" That question creates distance, and distance creates choice. Because when you can see the impulse, you don't have to follow it, you can let it pass. You can stay present, you can choose something stronger. And that's where leadership begins to take shape. Not in perfect moments, but in uncomfortable ones. In the split second where you could react. But you don't. Because in the next chapter, you're going to see how that single pause, just a few seconds long, can completely change the outcome of any situation, and most people underestimate it, until it's too late. Chapter 3. The Power of the Pause. Most people think control is something you build over time, through discipline, through habits, through long-term effort, and that's true. But there's a faster way to see it, a single move that can change how you show up, instantly. It doesn't take months, it doesn't take motivation. It doesn't even take confidence. It takes a few seconds, the pause. It sounds simple, too simple, which is exactly why most people underestimate it. Because when a moment hits, when pressure rises, when emotion kicks in, you don't think about pausing. You react, automatically. That's how you've been trained. Something happens leads to you respond. Someone speaks, you answer. You feel something, you act. No space, no gap, no control, just reaction. But what if you could interrupt that pattern? Not by forcing yourself to be calm, not by trying to suppress emotion, but by creating space, even for a second. I once watched a leader handle a situation that should have gone wrong, a team meeting, tension in the room, one person clearly frustrated, and then it happened. A direct challenge, sharp, public, unexpected. You could feel the shift instantly. Everyone in the room leaned in, waiting for the reaction. Most people would have answered immediately, defended themselves, justified their decision, tried to regain control through words. But he didn't. He paused. Not long, maybe 3 seconds. But in that silence, everything changed. He looked at the person, took a breath, and then responded, calm, precise, grounded. No tension, no ego, just clarity. And something subtle happened in the room. Respect increased, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't react. That's the power of the pause. It doesn't make you passive, it makes you intentional. Because the pause does something most people never experience. It separates the feeling from the action. That's the entire game. When emotion hits, it creates an impulse. React, defend, escape, speak. And if you follow that impulse immediately, you're not choosing, you're following. But when you pause, even briefly, you step outside the impulse. You see it. And once you can see it, you don't have to obey it. That's control. Not eliminating emotion, but not being owned by it. There's a simple way to understand this. Imagine 2 versions of yourself. The first one reacts instantly, says what they feel, does what they feel, moves without thinking. The second one pauses, feels the same emotion, experiences the same pressure, but waits, just long enough to choose. Both feel the same thing, only one leads. The difference isn't strength, it's timing. Most people think control means changing what they feel, but that's not realistic. You can't stop the emotion from showing up, but you can decide what happens next. And that decision lives inside the pause. Here's what makes it powerful. The pause is invisible. No one notices you doing it, but everyone feels the result, in your tone, in your presence, in your decisions. It's the difference between someone who feels reactive and someone who feels stable, and people trust stability. There's a simple way to apply this immediately. The next time something triggers you, anything, don't respond right away. Instead, do this. Take 1 breath, slowly, in. Hold for a second, then out. That's it. It sounds almost too small to matter. But that breath creates space, and in that space, your mind catches up to your emotion. Without it, emotion wins. Every time. With it, you have a chance. Not a guarantee, but a chance. And that's all you need. Because control doesn't come from perfection. It comes from catching even a few of those moments. And over time, those moments add up. There's a shift that happens when you start using the pause consistently. At first, it feels unnatural. You'll forget. You'll react. You'll miss it. That's normal. But then something changes. You begin to see the moment earlier. The trigger becomes visible. The impulse becomes familiar. And the pause becomes automatic. That's when control becomes part of you. Not something you try to do, something you naturally are. But here's the part most people don't expect. The pause doesn't just change your behavior, it changes how others see you. When you don't react immediately, people lean in. They pay attention. They feel that you're not being pulled by the moment. You're holding it. And that creates presence, a quiet kind of authority. Not loud, not forced, but undeniable. Because in a world where everyone reacts, the person who doesn't stands out instantly. That's leadership, not in what you say, but in how you hold the moment. And once you start seeing it, you realize something else. Most people aren't lacking confidence. They're lacking space. They've never given themselves the time to choose. They've been reacting their entire lives. So before you try to fix everything, your habits, your discipline, your mindset, start here. With 1 moment, the next time something triggers you. Don't change what you feel. Don't force yourself to be calm. Just pause. 1 breath, 1 second, 1 choice. because that small space is where control begins to turn into power. And in the next chapter, you're going to see what happens when you start choosing your responses consistently, and how that quietly changes the way people treat you. Chapter 4. What you react to owns you. Most people think control is about what you do, what you say, how you act, how you handle pressure. But there's something deeper, something quieter, something most people never question. What you react to. Because here's the truth that changes everything. What you react to owns you. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way you can easily see, but in small, repeated moments where something outside of you decides how you feel and what you do next. It could be a comment, a look, a tone, a message that doesn't come. And suddenly your state changes. You weren't thinking about it a second ago. Now it's all you can think about. That's not control. That's influence. And if you're not careful, it becomes dependence. I saw this play out in a way that stuck with me longer than I expected. A friend of mine had been working toward a promotion for months. Consistent, focused, putting in the effort. Everyone around him could see it. And then one day, during a team discussion, his manager gave him feedback. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't public. It wasn't even negative, but it was direct. You're doing well, but sometimes you come across as defensive. That was it, a simple sentence. But something in him reacted immediately. You could see it in his face. Not anger, not frustration, something quieter. Resistance. That subtle tightening when you feel misunderstood. He nodded, said nothing, moved on. But later it showed up, in the way he spoke, in the way he wrote emails, in the way he interpreted everything that manager said after that. Every comment felt like criticism, every suggestion felt like doubt. And slowly, something shifted. Not in his ability, in his perception. He started reacting, not to what was actually happening, but to what he believed was happening. And that changed everything. Because once you start reacting to your interpretation instead of reality, you're no longer grounded. You're inside your own story, and stories are powerful. They can protect you, but they can also trap you. A few weeks later, he told me something that made it clear. I feel like no matter what I do, it's not enough. But when we broke it down, fact by fact, that wasn't true. The feedback hadn't changed, the expectations hadn't changed. Only one thing had changed, what he reacted to. That one sentence didn't just pass through him. He held on to it, repeated it, gave it weight. And over time, it started controlling how he showed up. That's how ownership works. Not when something happens, but when you keep reacting to it, again and again. Most people don't realize this. They think they're reacting to events. But they're not. They're reacting to meaning. The meaning they assign. Someone doesn't reply quickly leads to, they don't respect me. Someone challenges you leads to, they think I'm wrong. Someone gives feedback. I'm not good enough. And once that meaning takes hold, your reaction feels justified, logical, even necessary. But here's the twist most people miss. The moment you react emotionally to something, you give it control over you. Not because it's powerful, but because you made it important. And importance drives attention. Attention drives emotion. Emotion drives behavior. That's the chain. And once you're in it, you're not leading anymore. You're following. There's a subtle difference between noticing something and reacting to it. Noticing is awareness. Reacting is attachment. When you notice something, it passes. When you react to it, it stays. And what stays shapes you. That's why two people can experience the exact same situation and walk away completely different. One lets it go, the other carries it. One moves forward, the other keeps replaying it. Same moment, different reaction, different outcome. The goal isn't to stop caring. That's not realistic, and it's not leadership. The goal is to choose what deserves your reaction, because not everything does. Not every comment needs a response. Not every opinion needs your energy. Not every situation deserves space in your mind. But most people don't choose. They react to everything. And over time, they become controlled by everything. That's exhausting, and it's invisible. Because from the outside, it just looks like you're dealing with things. But inside, you're being pulled in every direction. By people, by opinions, by situations you don't even control. That's not leadership. That's survival. There's a shift that happens when you start seeing this clearly. You begin to realize that control isn't about doing more. It's about reacting less. Not less in quantity, but less in instinct, more in intention. You don't respond to everything, you filter, you decide, you choose what matters, and more importantly, you choose what doesn't. I remember a moment where I had to apply this in a way that wasn't comfortable. Someone said something about me that wasn't accurate. Not directly to me, but it came back around, and I felt it immediately. That urge to correct it, to explain, to fix the narrative, because that's what we do. We protect how we're seen. But I paused, not because I didn't care, but because I asked myself a different question. Does this actually need my reaction? Not my opinion, not my emotion, my reaction. And the answer was no. It didn't affect my work. It didn't change reality. It only challenged my ego. So I let it pass. And something unexpected happened. Nothing got worse. In fact, it faded. Because most things only grow when you feed them attention. That's another truth most people don't realize. Your reaction gives things energy. Without it, they weaken. With it, they expand. So the real question isn't, what should I do? It's, what deserves my response? Because every reaction is a decision, even when it feels automatic. And the more intentional you become with that decision, the less control the outside world has over you. That's where real stability begins, not in controlling everything around you, but in no longer being controlled by it. And in the next chapter, you're going to see how that stability turns into something even more powerful, the kind of presence that makes people trust you, without you saying a word. Chapter 5. The Discipline. No one sees. Most people think discipline is loud, waking up early, working harder than everyone else, pushing through when it hurts. They picture effort, intensity, visible grind. But the kind of discipline that actually changes your life is almost invisible. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need recognition. And most of the time, no one else even notices it's there. Because real discipline isn't about what you show. It's about what you keep, the promises you make to yourself, and whether you follow through when no one is watching. I learned this in a way that wasn't impressive. There was a period where I told myself I would fix something simple. Wake up at a consistent time, not early, not extreme, just consistent. It sounded easy. And for a few days it was. Alarm rings. Get up. Start the day. No struggle, no resistance. But then, one morning, I didn't feel like it. Nothing dramatic. Just that quiet voice. Stay in bed a little longer. No consequences, no urgency, no one waiting. So I stayed. And the next day, I did the same. Then again. And suddenly something small started to shift. Not my schedule, my self-trust. Because every time I ignored what I said I would do, something inside me registered it, not loudly, but clearly. You don't follow through. That's the part people don't talk about. Discipline isn't just about results. It's about identity. Every time you do what you said you would do, you reinforce something. I can trust myself. And every time you don't, you reinforce something else. I don't. It doesn't matter how small the action is. Your mind is always watching, always recording, always deciding who you are. I saw this play out again with someone I worked with. He wasn't the most talented person on the team, not the fastest, not the smartest, not the most creative. But there was something different about him. He did exactly what he said he would do. If he committed to something, it got done. No excuses, no delays, no adjustments based on mood. At first, no one paid much attention. But over time, something changed. People started relying on him more, giving him more responsibility, trusting him in situations where others were overlooked. Not because he stood out in skill, but because he stood out in consistency. And consistency builds something most people chase but rarely earn: trust. Not just from others, from yourself. Here's the twist most people miss. Discipline isn't about forcing yourself to do more. It's about removing the gap between what you say and what you do. That gap is where most people lose power. They set goals, make plans, say things like, "I'll start tomorrow." And for a moment it feels real. But when the moment comes, they hesitate, adjust, delay, avoid, and slowly, without realizing it, they create a pattern. Say, "Don't do." Say, "Don't do." Say, "Don't do," until eventually, their own words stop carrying weight, not to others, to themselves. That's when discipline becomes hard, not because the actions are difficult, but because the belief is gone. If you don't trust yourself, everything feels harder. Decisions feel heavier, actions feel forced, and progress feels inconsistent. Because at the core, there's a question you haven't answered. Will I actually follow through this time? That doubt changes everything. And it builds quietly, through small broken promises. Not big failures, small ones. I'll do it later. I'll start tomorrow. It's not a big deal. Individually, they seem harmless. But together, they shape something deeper, your standard. And your standard determines your results. Not your motivation, not your mood, your standard. The level at which you operate, regardless of how you feel. That's what discipline really is, not intensity, consistency, not perfection, alignment. Between intention and action. I remember a conversation I had with that same colleague one evening. We had both stayed late, finishing up work. I asked him, "How do you stay this consistent? Don't you ever feel like not doing it?" He smiled, almost confused by the question. "Of course I do," he said. "Then why don't you skip it?" He paused for a second, then said something that stuck. "Because if I start choosing based on how I feel, I won't recognize myself in a few months." That's it. That's the difference. He wasn't trying to be disciplined. He was protecting who he was becoming, and that changes the game. Because when discipline becomes about identity, you don't negotiate with it. You don't debate it. You don't wait to feel ready. You act. Not because it's easy, but because it's who you are. Most people wait until something feels important enough to take seriously. A deadline, a consequence, a visible outcome. But by then, it's too late to build discipline. Because discipline isn't built under pressure, it's revealed under pressure. What you do when it doesn't matter is what you'll do when it does. That's why the smallest actions carry the most weight, not because of what they achieve, but because of what they prove. Every time you follow through on something small, you're not just completing a task, you're building evidence. Evidence that you can rely on yourself. And once you have that, everything changes. Your decisions become cleaner. Your actions become faster. Your confidence becomes real. Not based on what you hope you'll do, but on what you've already proven. So before you try to lead anything bigger, build this first, the discipline no one sees, the kind that doesn't need recognition, the kind that doesn't depend on how you feel, the kind that shows up, even when it would be easier not to. Because once you close the gap between your words and your actions, you don't just become more productive, you become more powerful. And in the next chapter, you're going to see what happens when that power becomes consistent, and how it changes the way people respond to you, without you saying a word. Chapter 6. The Quiet Power. People can't ignore. Most people think leadership is something you prove, with results, with confidence, with the way you speak, the way you present, the way you show up in front of others. They believe if they just improve enough, become sharper, faster, more impressive, people will naturally respect them. But that's not how it works. Because real leadership isn't something you display. It's something people feel, and what they feel has very little to do with what you say, and everything to do with how consistent you are. There's a kind of power that doesn't need to speak loudly. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't compete. It doesn't try to prove anything. But when it's there, everyone notices. I remember working with someone like this. He wasn't the most outgoing person in the room, didn't speak often, didn't dominate conversations. In fact, if you met him for the first time, you might not think much of it. But over time, something became clear. When he spoke, people listened. Not because he demanded attention, but because he had earned it. There was a steadiness in him, a calm that didn't shift based on the situation. Pressure didn't speed him up. Conflict didn't pull him in. Uncertainty didn't shake him. And people could feel that. It showed up in small ways. If he said he would do something, it was done. If something went wrong, he didn't react. He adjusted. If others became emotional, he stayed grounded. At first, no one pointed it out. But gradually, the dynamic changed. People started asking for his opinion, deferring to his judgment, trusting his presence in difficult situations, not because of authority, because of consistency. That's the part most people miss. You don't earn respect through intensity, you earn it through predictability, not boring predictability, but emotional stability. The kind that tells people, this person won't break under pressure. And when people feel that, they relax around you, they trust you, they follow you. Here's the twist. Most people try to gain respect by adding more talking, more explaining, more proving. But real presence is built by removing unnecessary reactions, removing emotional spikes, removing inconsistency. until what's left is stable, and stability is rare, especially in a world where everyone reacts instantly. Think about the last time you were around someone who was unpredictable. One day they're calm, the next day they're distant, then reactive, then quiet, then overly engaged. You never quite know what version of them you're going to get. So what do? You adjust. You become careful, measured, guarded. Not because you want to, but because you don't trust the environment. Now imagine the opposite. Someone who is consistent, not perfect, but stable. Their tone doesn't swing wildly. Their behavior doesn't depend on mood. Their reactions don't surprise you. You know what to expect. And that changes everything. You relax. You speak more freely. You trust more easily. That's what consistency creates. Not control over others, but safety for others. And people are drawn to that. I saw this contrast clearly in a situation that could have gone very differently. Two team leads, same level, same responsibility. A problem came up. Unexpected, urgent, visible. The first reacted immediately, started asking questions fast, voice slightly raised, trying to fix everything at once. The intention was good, but the energy was scattered. People around him mirrored that energy. They rushed. They made mistakes. They became reactive. The second didn't move right away. He paused, looked at the situation, asked one question, then another, slow, focused, clear. His energy didn't match the chaos. It absorbed it, and slowly the room shifted. People slowed down. They focused. They followed. Same problem, different presence, different outcome. That's the difference consistency makes. Not in what you do, but in how others respond to you. And here's the part most people don't realize. You don't build that kind of presence in the moment. You bring it into the moment. It's built long before. In the small choices, the repeated actions, the discipline no one sees. That's what creates stability. And stability is what people trust. Because when everything else is uncertain, people look for something that isn't. They look for someone who doesn't shift with every change, someone who holds steady. That's where influence begins, not by controlling others, but by controlling yourself so consistently that others naturally align with you. Most people try to lead by pushing, giving direction, setting expectations, driving outcomes. But the strongest leaders don't push. They pull. Not with force, with presence. And presence comes from alignment. When your words match your actions, when your reactions match your values. When your behavior doesn't depend on how you feel, that's when people stop questioning you. Not because they have to follow, but because they want to. Because consistency creates something deeper than authority. It creates belief. And belief is what people actually follow. So, if you want to lead, don't focus on being impressive. Focus on being consistent, not for others, for yourself. Because the moment you become someone people can rely on, without needing to question what version of you they'll get, you stop chasing respect and start receiving it, quietly, naturally, without effort. And in the next chapter, you're going to see how to take that consistency even further and turn it into a daily system that builds control without relying on motivation at all. Chapter 7. The System That Carries You. Most people try to change their lives with effort. They push harder. They try to stay motivated. They wait for the right moment to finally become consistent, and for a few days it works. They wake up earlier. They focus more. They follow through, until they don't. Because motivation fades. It always does, and when it does, most people fall back, not because they're weak, but because they were relying on something unstable to begin with. That's the mistake. They think control comes from trying harder, but control doesn't come from effort. It comes from structure, from having something that holds you when you don't feel like holding yourself. A system, not a perfect one, not a complicated one. Just something consistent enough to carry you through the moments when discipline feels distant. I learned this the hard way. There was a time when I believed I just needed to be better, more focused, more disciplined, more consistent, and every week I would reset. This time I'll stick to it. New plan, new rules, new expectations. And every week the same pattern. Start strong, lose momentum, break the plan, start again. At some point it stopped being frustrating. It became predictable. And that's when something shifted. I realized I wasn't failing because I lacked discipline. I was failing because I was relying on willpower, and willpower is unreliable. It depends on mood, energy, stress, everything that changes day to day. So I stopped trying to be stronger. And I started building something simpler, a structure I didn't have to think about. It started with one rule. Every morning before I did anything else, I sat down and worked on the most important task of the day. No phone, no checking messages, no decision making. Just start. It didn't matter how I felt. It didn't matter if I was motivated. It didn't even matter if I did it perfectly. What mattered was that it happened. Every day. At first it felt forced, unnatural. There were days I resisted it. Days I sat there staring at the screen doing almost nothing. But I stayed. And that was the difference. Because I wasn't building productivity. I was building a pattern. Show up, start, stay. That's it. Over time something changed. It stopped feeling like effort. It became automatic, not because I became more disciplined, but because I removed the need to decide. And that's the part most people miss. Every time you rely on motivation, you're making a decision. Do I feel like doing this? Is this the right time? Should I start now or later? And every decision creates friction. Friction leads to delay. Delay leads to avoidance, and avoidance becomes a habit. But when you have a system, you don't decide, you follow. That's where control becomes easier. Not because you've become stronger, but because you've removed the things that make it harder. I saw this clearly in someone I worked with. He wasn't someone who talked about discipline, didn't share routines, didn't push himself in visible ways, but every day at the same time he did the same thing. Focused work, no interruptions. It didn't matter if the day was busy. It didn't matter if things were chaotic. That block of time was protected, and over months the results showed, not in bursts, in consistency. While others had good days and bad days, he had steady progress, and steady progress compounds. That's the power of a system. It doesn't rely on how you feel. It carries you when you don't feel like moving. Here's the twist most people don't realize. A system doesn't just help you act, it shapes your identity. Because when you follow something consistently, you stop asking, will I do this today? And you start seeing yourself differently. I'm someone who shows up. I'm someone who follows through. I'm someone who doesn't negotiate with what matters. That shift is quiet, but powerful. Because once your identity changes, your behavior follows, not the other way around. Most people try to act their way into a new identity, but the truth is, you build identity through repetition, through systems, through showing up when it would be easier not to. That's how control becomes natural. Not forced, not temporary, but part of who you are. There's something else that happens when you build a system. You stop depending on perfect days. You stop waiting for the right mood. You stop thinking everything has to align for you to move, because you've already decided, not in the moment, but ahead of time. And that's what removes hesitation. That's what removes overthinking. That's what removes the constant internal debate. Because the system answers the question before it even shows up. What do I do now? You already know. And when you know, you act. Without friction, without delay, without needing to convince yourself. That's when control becomes consistent. And consistency becomes power. Not loud power, not visible power, but the kind that builds quietly, day by day, until one day you look back and realize you're no longer trying to control your life. You are controlling it. Not perfectly, but reliably. And that's enough. Because leadership doesn't come from occasional effort. It comes from repeated alignment, from doing what matters, even when nothing is forcing you to. So if you want to take control of your life, don't start with intensity. Start with structure. Build something simple, something repeatable, something you can follow, even on your worst days. Because once that system is in place, you don't have to rely on motivation anymore. You don't have to hope you'll show up. You already know you will. And in the next chapter, you're going to see what happens when that level of control becomes unshakable, when nothing outside of you can pull you away from who you've become. Chapter 8, when nothing can shake you. Most people think strength is about pushing harder, enduring more, fighting through pressure, proving they can handle anything. But real strength doesn't look like that. It doesn't strain, it doesn't force, it doesn't need to prove anything. Real strength is quiet. It's the ability to stay the same when everything around you is trying to pull you in a different direction. Because here's the truth most people don't realize. You're not tested when things are easy. You're tested when something tries to move you, a comment, a setback, a moment that doesn't go your way. And in that moment, there's a pull. React, defend, adjust who you are, just enough to make it easier. That's where most people lose everything they've built. Not because they lack discipline, but because they give it up when it's no longer convenient. I saw this happen in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Someone I knew had spent months building consistency, waking up early, staying focused, following through. The kind of quiet discipline that changes your life, and it worked. He became sharper, more reliable, more in control. You could see it. Then something unexpected happened. A project failed, not completely, but enough to matter. Deadlines were missed. Expectations weren't met. And suddenly all the progress he had made felt fragile. You could see the shift almost immediately, not in what he said, in what he allowed. He started sleeping in again, skipping the routine he had built, telling himself he needed a break, and it made sense. After all, he had just gone through something difficult. He deserved it. That's how it always begins. Not with failure, with justification. Because the moment you tie your discipline to your circumstances, you lose control the second those circumstances change. That's the trap. Most people don't build consistency, they build conditional consistency. I'll stay disciplined as long as things are going well. I'll stay focused as long as I feel good. I'll follow through as long as it's working. But life doesn't work like that. Things don't always go your way. People disappoint you. Plans fall apart. Effort doesn't always lead to immediate results. And when that happens, you find out what your discipline is actually built on: convenience or identity. That's the twist. The goal isn't to build a life where nothing goes wrong. The goal is to become someone who doesn't change when things do. That's what makes you unshakable. Not perfection, stability. I remember a moment where I had to face this directly. Something I had worked on for a long time didn't turn out the way I expected. Not because I didn't try, not because I didn't care. It just didn't work. And in that moment I felt it. The urge to step back, to disconnect, to give myself permission to stop showing up the same way, not forever. Just for a while. That's how it always feels. Temporary, harmless. But I had seen this pattern before, not in others, in myself. And I knew what came next if I followed it. One missed day becomes two. Two becomes a week, and suddenly you're not the same person anymore. Not because something big happened, but because you slowly let go of what made you stable. So I did something simple, not dramatic, not impressive. I kept the system. Not at full intensity, not perfectly, but consistently. I showed up. Even when it felt pointless, even when it didn't feel good, even when there was no immediate reward. And something unexpected happened. The situation didn't change right away, but I didn't either. And that made all the difference, because when you don't change, your direction doesn't change. And over time, direction is what determines everything. Most people think confidence comes from success, from winning, from things going right. But real confidence comes from something else. Knowing that no matter what happens, you won't abandon yourself. You won't drop your standards. You won't shift based on emotion. You won't disappear when it gets uncomfortable. That's rare. And people feel it. Because most people are used to instability. They're used to people who change under pressure, who say one thing, Maurice, and do another when it matters. So when they meet someone who doesn't shift, it stands out, not loudly, but clearly. That's what makes someone unshakable. Not that nothing affects them, but that nothing controls them. There's a difference. You can feel everything and still choose your actions. You can experience setbacks and still move forward. You can face uncertainty and still stay grounded. That's control at its highest level. Not in perfect conditions, but in imperfect ones. Because anyone can stay consistent when things are easy. That doesn't prove anything. What proves something is who you are when it would be easier not to be that person. That's where identity becomes real. Not an intention, in action, and once you reach that point, something shifts. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking, should I do this today? Because the answer is already decided. You act, because that's who you are. And when you become that person, something else happens. The outside world loses its grip on you. Not completely, but enough. Enough that a bad day doesn't change your direction. Enough that someone else's opinion doesn't define your behavior. Enough that temporary discomfort doesn't break your consistency. That's what freedom actually looks like, not doing whatever you want, but not being controlled by what you feel. Because when nothing can pull you away from your standards, you don't just have discipline, you have power. And that power doesn't come from force, it comes from alignment between who you are and how you act. No matter what, that's where leadership reaches its final form. Not in controlling others, not in proving anything, but in becoming someone who remains the same in every situation that tries to change them. Because when you reach that point, you don't just lead your life, you own it. You've just gone through something most people avoid. Not information, not motivation, but a mirror. Because everything you've heard in this video points back to one thing: control. Not over other people, not over circumstances, but over yourself. We started with a simple truth: you can't lead until you control yourself. And along the way, you saw what that really means. It's not about one big moment, it's about the small ones. The moments where you lose focus without noticing. The moments where emotion takes over before you can think. The moments where you react instead of choosing. That's where control is lost. But you also saw something else. That control can be rebuilt, not by forcing yourself to be perfect, but by becoming aware, by catching the moment before it takes you, by creating space between what you feel and what you do, by choosing what deserves your reaction and letting everything else pass. You saw how discipline isn't about intensity. It's about consistency. Keeping the promises you make to yourself, showing up, even when it would be easier not to. And over time, that builds something deeper. Trust. Not from others, from yourself. You saw how systems matter more than motivation. Because motivation fades, but structure stays. And when you build something that carries you, something simple, repeatable, reliable, you stop depending on how you feel. You act. You follow through. You become consistent. And that consistency becomes presence. A quiet kind of power, the kind people feel without you needing to say anything. Because when you stay grounded, when you don't react, when you remain stable under pressure, people notice, they trust you, they follow you. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And finally, you saw what it means to become unshakable, not perfect, not unaffected, but steady. The kind of person who doesn't change when things go wrong, who doesn't disappear when it gets hard, who doesn't abandon their standards when it's inconvenient. That's where real leadership begins. Not in controlling others, but in no longer being controlled by anything. So now, the question isn't, did this make sense? The question is, what will you do with it? Because none of this matters if it stays here, if it stays as an idea. Something you agree with, but don't apply. Real change doesn't happen when you understand something, it happens when you practice it, so start small. The next time you feel the urge to react, pause. The next time you want to avoid something, stay. The next time you say you'll do something, follow through. Not perfectly, just intentionally. Because every time you do that, you take back control, and over time, those moments add up. They shape your habits, they shape your identity, they shape your life. If this video resonated with you, if you saw parts of yourself in it, then don't keep it to yourself. There's someone you know right now who's struggling. Not because they're weak, but because they haven't learned how to control themselves yet. Share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need, at exactly the right time. Thank you for being here, for listening, for reflecting, for choosing to become better, quietly, consistently, and for the right reasons. And if you're ready to go deeper, to build this mindset further, step by step, I'll see you in the next video.